My sister looked me dead in the eye and said, "You never help with anything," right after I spent nearly my entire savings paying for her wedding. And that's the moment something in me finally snapped. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Lene, and my relationship with my younger sister, Marley, has always been complicated. Growing up, I was the one who worked extra hours, helped our mom with bills, and stepped in whenever something went wrong. Marley was the delicate one, the one everyone felt they needed to protect. I never complained, not even when things felt unfair. When Marley got engaged to her boyfriend, Rowan, my mom immediately said, "Lene will help with the costs." I wanted to say no, but Marley cried about wanting her dream wedding, so I agreed. What started as paying for the venue deposit turned into covering almost everything: flowers, catering, dress adjustments, and last-minute decorations. She kept saying she'd pay me back once things settled, and I kept believing her. A week before the wedding, she snapped at me constantly. I tried to ignore it. But on the wedding day, when a boutonniere went missing, she screamed in front of everyone that I never help. I stood there frozen, feeling like someone had punched me. Later, Rowan thanked me quietly for paying for the wedding and told me Marley was telling people she funded it herself. That was the moment I realized my sister didn't just use me, she erased me. That day changed everything. And for once in my life, I decided I wasn't going to stay quiet. After our dad passed, the weight of the house seemed to fall straight onto my shoulders. I was still young, but I woke up early every morning to work whatever shifts I could find. I helped my mom keep the lights on, paid for groceries when her paycheck came up short, and handled things she didn't have the energy for. It wasn't something we talked about, it was just what I did because someone had to. Marley, on the other hand, lived in a completely different world. Everyone saw her as fragile, someone who needed protection from anything difficult. If chores needed doing, I did them. If something broke, I fixed it. If money was tight, I found a way. Meanwhile, Marley was told to rest, to stay calm, to not worry. Any small stress sent the whole house into a panic, like she might shatter if life pressed on her too hard. I never blamed her at first. I thought that was what being the older sister meant, carrying the heavy parts so she didn't have to. But as the years passed, the pattern never changed. No matter how old we got, everyone still treated her like she shouldn't lift a finger. And I was the reliable one, the one expected to step up without question, without thanks, without even being noticed. I didn't resent it then, not fully. I just accepted that this was my role. I was the dependable daughter, the problem solver, the one who held the family together when everything felt uncertain. And she was the one everyone gathered around, the one they insisted needed extra care. It wasn't until much later that I realized how deeply those expectations had shaped us, and how much they would cost me. When Marley announced she was getting married to Rowan, it felt like the entire house burst into excitement at once. My mom clapped her hands, my aunt cried, and everyone started talking about colors, venues, and plans before the ring even stopped shining. I stood there smiling for her, even though a knot was already forming in my stomach. I knew what was coming long before anyone said a word. It didn't take long. During dinner that night, my uncle joked about how Lene always makes things happen, and my mom nodded like it was a settled fact. They spoke as if I was some built-in bank account, like I had already volunteered. I kept quiet, hoping someone else would step forward or at least question the assumption. Nobody did. Later that evening, Marley pulled me aside. She talked about how she dreamed of a beautiful ceremony, something she could remember forever. Her voice shook, and tears started slipping down her face. She said she wanted everything to be perfect from the very beginning, that it mattered more to her than anything. I felt that familiar pressure tighten around me, years of being the one who fixed things making it impossible to say no. I tried to explain that my savings were meant for my own future, but the moment I hesitated, her expression crumbled. She cried harder, saying she didn't want to start her life with Rowan feeling like she had settled for less. The guilt washed over me in one heavy wave. I'd spent so much of my life stepping in, and it felt impossible to stop now without looking cruel. So I agreed, even though my chest felt hollow as I said the words. I told her I would help however I could. And just like that, the path I never wanted to walk opened right in front of me. At first, it all seemed manageable. Marley asked if I could handle the down payment for the place they wanted, insisting it was just to secure the date. I told myself it was a one-time thing, something I could recover from with a little extra work. But as soon as that was taken care of, more requests started coming, each one sounding urgent and absolutely necessary for her big day. One afternoon she called in a panic because the food arrangements needed to be finalized. She said the company required payment up front, and she didn't have the funds in her account yet. I covered it, telling myself she would reimburse me soon. The next week it was flowers, and she swore she had been promised a better price, but it fell through. Then came fittings for her dress, small fixes that somehow cost more every time she visited the shop. I kept track of everything, though every receipt made me feel more drained. I didn't want to admit it, but my savings were disappearing faster than I could rebuild them. Still, whenever I hesitated, she reminded me she would return every dollar once things calmed down after the celebration. She said it so confidently that I believed her, even when it made my stomach twist. As the event got closer, the expenses became more frantic. Marley called me late at night asking for help getting centerpieces that were suddenly essential, or lights she claimed would transform the space. Each time, I heard the same promise: once the stress was over, she would make everything right. I kept going because I wanted to trust her. I wanted to believe that helping her through this moment was worth the strain. But with every payment I made, I felt myself slipping into a place I never meant to be, tired, worried, and stretched far beyond what I could afford. The days leading up to the ceremony felt heavier than anything that came before. Every time I showed up to help with errands or check on details, Marley seemed ready to explode over the smallest slip. If I brought the wrong ribbon, she rolled her eyes. If I showed up 5 minutes late, she acted like I'd ruined her entire plan for the afternoon. I kept reminding myself that nerves can make people sharp, and I pushed down the sting each time she snapped at me. Each morning started with a long list she expected me to handle: pick up items, double-check arrangements, follow up with workers. I did everything the best I could, trying not to let her tone get under my skin. I told myself she just wanted everything to go smoothly. Still, something in her attitude felt unfamiliar, almost cold. She barely said thanks, barely looked at me unless she was pointing out something she didn't like. One evening, after finishing a set of tasks she sent me out for, I walked into my mom's living room and paused when I heard voices from the kitchen. Marley was talking to one of our cousins, her voice low but sharp. She said she wished I would be helpful for once, that she felt like she was doing everything alone. I stood there frozen, confused by how easily she dismissed everything I had done. It was strange hearing her say that after all the hours I'd spent running around, trying to keep things together. I stepped back quietly so they wouldn't realize I heard them. I told myself she was overwhelmed, that the pressure was twisting her words. It felt easier to believe stress was driving her than to accept she really meant it. So I swallowed the hurt and kept moving, hoping the actual day would bring out a kinder side of her again. The morning of the ceremony felt tense from the moment I arrived. People rushed around adjusting chairs, fixing makeup, checking the time every few seconds. I kept to myself, wanting to avoid anything that might set Marley off. I had already handled errands earlier that morning, hoping it would keep things calm. For a while, it looked like everything was finally settling into place. Then someone realized one small item wasn't where it should have been. A single piece meant for Rowan's jacket had gone missing. It wasn't expensive, and it wasn't complicated to replace, but the second Marley heard about it, she spun around and glared at me like I had ruined her entire day. Before I could say a word, she raised her voice so loudly the whole room went silent. She said I never did anything right, that I didn't contribute, that she wished she could count on someone else. Her words hit with a force I wasn't ready for. People turned to stare, whispering, trying to figure out what had just happened. I stood there frozen, feeling like the ground had shifted under me. I wanted to remind her of everything I had done, the long nights working extra hours. The payments I made without hesitation. The countless tasks I had handled so she wouldn't have to worry. But nothing came out. My throat felt tight, and all I could do was stare at her while she kept throwing blame at me. Someone hurried to fix the problem, but the damage was already done. My face burned, and I felt smaller than I ever had. Watching her walk away, acting like nothing mattered except her own frustration, left a hollow ache in my chest. I knew then that nothing I had sacrificed meant anything to her, not even on the day she said she had dreamed about her whole life. When the ceremony finally ended, I slipped to the side, hoping to blend into the crowd and let the rest of the celebration move on without drawing attention. I still felt the sting from earlier, though I tried to hold myself together. I didn't want her outburst to ruin the entire day, even if it had already bruised something deep inside me. While guests moved toward the reception area, Rowan approached me. His voice was low, almost uneasy, when he thanked me for helping make everything possible. At first, I thought he meant the errands or support, but then he mentioned the payments. He said he didn't know how to express his appreciation for covering so much. I felt a strange sense of relief, thinking someone finally understood the burden I had carried. But then he hesitated, looking confused. He explained that several people had praised Marley for funding her own celebration, saying it was impressive she handled such large expenses on her own. He said she'd been telling relatives she saved for years to create the day she wanted. I stared at him, not sure I heard correctly. Every receipt, every transfer, every sacrifice I made, she had taken all of it and turned it into a story that made her look admirable. It settled slowly, like something sour spreading through my chest. Not only had she dismissed me in front of everyone, she had also taken credit for everything I poured into her dream. She stood in the center of the room, glowing, accepting compliments for things she never paid for and never planned. Watching her laugh with guests while they admired her hard work made something inside me crumble. At that moment, the quiet ache I'd been ignoring for years finally sharpened into something clear. She hadn't just overlooked what I'd done. She had erased me completely. When I finally walked through my front door that night, the silence felt heavier than anything that had happened earlier. I sat down on the edge of my couch, still in the clothes I'd worn to the event, and let everything sink in. The scene kept replaying in my mind, her shouting, the stares, the way she accepted praise that didn't belong to her. My chest felt tight, but underneath the hurt, something new was forming, something steadier than the guilt that had guided me for years. After a long moment, I stood up and went to the small drawer in my desk where I kept important papers. I pulled out the folder I had been stuffing things into for months. It was thicker than I remembered. Inside were the printed confirmations, the totals I had covered, and the documents she had signed when she promised to give the money back. I had asked for those signatures only because I wanted some kind of security, even though I never planned to use them. I thought they were just there for peace of mind. Now, looking at each page, I felt a shift inside me. I had spent so much time trying to keep things smooth, avoiding conflict, stepping in whenever she needed something. But standing there with all the proof in front of me, I finally understood how far things had gone. She had counted on me staying quiet. She always did. She assumed I wouldn't say anything, no matter how much her choices cost me. For the first time, I didn't feel afraid of what might happen if I stopped shielding her. I didn't feel guilty for wanting something fair. I felt calm, steady in a way I hadn't felt before. I closed the folder, set it on the table, and made a decision I should have made years ago. I wasn't going to cover for her anymore. The next morning, I woke up with my decision already sitting in my chest like a steady weight. I gathered the folder, took a deep breath, and drove to the place Marley and Rowan were staying. My hands were steady on the wheel, which surprised me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply done. When I knocked, Rowan opened the door. He looked worn out, but he invited me in without hesitation. Marley was sitting on the couch, scrolling through a stack of cards from the reception. She barely looked up when I entered. I sat across from them, placed the folder on the table, and said I needed to go over something important. I opened it and laid out the pages one by one. I didn't raise my voice or explain my feelings. I just stated the numbers, the dates, and the commitments she had agreed to during the planning. For a moment, the room stayed quiet, as if everyone was holding their breath. Then Marley let out a short laugh. She leaned back and said it all like it was obvious. I had offered, so it was basically a present. She told me not to act like I saved anything, as if months of strain meant nothing. Her tone was light, almost mocking, like the entire situation was just a misunderstanding I needed to let go. Rowan looked over the papers while she talked. His expression shifted slowly from confusion to disbelief. He asked her why she hadn't mentioned any of it. She brushed him off, saying it wasn't a big deal, that I was being dramatic. But he didn't look away from the totals. His face lost its color, and he asked if she had truly promised to reimburse me. She didn't answer. That silence said everything. He finally understood what I had been carrying alone. And for the first time, I didn't feel invisible. After seeing the documents, Rowan's expression hardened. He turned to Marley and said firmly that this couldn't be ignored. She had accepted money that wasn't hers to spend, and he wasn't willing to let her erase it any longer. He told her they had an obligation to make things right, that he wouldn't stand by while she rewrote the story of the wedding. Marley's response was immediate and sharp. She accused me of trying to destroy her marriage, painting me as the villain for simply asking for what I was owed. Her voice rose, her words sharp and desperate. Rowan tried to reason with her, but she refused to listen, insisting that everything was fine and that I was overreacting. The tension in the room escalated quickly, voices overlapping, anger mixing with disbelief, until the atmosphere was unbearable. I stayed quiet, letting them argue, because I realized nothing I said could fix her denial. Rowan, frustrated and determined to do the right thing, eventually left to stay at his brother's place. He explained he needed space to think and to make sure the finances were handled properly without further confrontation. Marley remained behind, fuming and indignant, claiming victory in her distorted version of events. The silence that followed after he left was heavy. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief because at least one person understood the truth, and sadness because the bond one thought my sister and I had was crumbling in front of me. I knew it would take time for everything to settle, but for the first time, I felt the weight of standing up for myself rather than shielding someone else from the consequences of their actions. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would no longer carry the burden alone. After a few weeks of standoff, I realized talking wouldn't resolve anything. I contacted a lawyer and prepared the necessary paperwork to recover what I had spent. Filing a legal claim against my own sister felt surreal, almost impossible. I had never imagined taking such a step, but every instinct told me this was the only way to protect myself from being taken advantage of again. When my mother saw the documents, her face went pale. She didn't speak at first, just scanned the pages over and over. Then, slowly, she nodded, finally understanding the full extent of what I had covered for Marley. She admitted she hadn't realized how far things had gone and told me she supported me completely. That moment, her backing, gave me the courage to continue. Word of the legal action spread quietly through the family, and Marley's image started to shift. Relatives who had once admired her suddenly questioned the stories she had told, realizing now that much of it had been false. Conversations that had once praised her for being organized and independent turned into whispered doubts. Her standing in the family began to crumble, and I felt a quiet sense of justice as the truth came to light. Not long after, bills and repayment notices started arriving at her door. For the first time, Marley had to face the consequences of her choices directly. She realized she couldn't hide from responsibility, that the life she thought she could manipulate was catching up to her. I watched from the sidelines, not with glee, but with relief, knowing that fairness was finally finding its place and that I was no longer powerless in the situation. Months passed, and slowly, the repayments began to arrive in the bank, each one a quiet reminder that I had reclaimed what was rightfully mine. The court-ordered schedule made the process steady and predictable, and I no longer had to chase or plead for what I had spent. It was a strange relief to see the numbers add up, knowing that the imbalance had finally been corrected. Word spread that Rowan had moved out and that their marriage was effectively over. It wasn't my intention to break them apart, but seeing the consequences of choices become real for Marley gave me a sense of closure I hadn't thought possible. I felt the tension that had been knotted in my chest for years slowly unwind, replaced by a calm I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. I spent hours reflecting on everything, the endless errands, the late nights, the constant strain I carried silently. Betrayal had forced me to confront my own limits and claim boundaries I had always avoided. For the first time, I recognized the strength in standing up for myself, even when it meant facing family conflict and awkward truths. The weight of responsibility I had always carried for everyone else's happiness lifted, leaving space for my own. I could breathe again without guilt pressing on my shoulders, without the constant worry of being manipulated or overlooked. I didn't seek revenge, nor did I plan to humiliate anyone. But justice, fair and unwavering, had a power that felt almost sacred. With it came freedom. Months later, as I sat quietly in my own space, I realized I was lighter, calmer, and finally able to care for myself without fear. The burden of being everyone's crutch was gone, and in its place was a quiet, steady peace I had earned. Hey besties! Thanks so much for sticking with me through this emotional journey.